On the outside, John was a model family man. Despite his middle age, he seemed to have the perfect life with a successful career, a beautiful home, and 2 children. But inside, he felt a great emptiness. The bond between him and his wife had weakened over the years, and their relationship had been reduced to daily obligations. Whenever he tried to talk to her, he found her indifferent and tired. To escape this monotony, he would sneak into anonymous chat apps at night, talking to different women and trying to escape the boredom in which he was lost. At first, he was just looking for an innocent thrill, but this soon turned into an addiction he couldn't give up. One night, he started talking to a woman who used the pseudonym Melanie. Melanie was different from the others. Her sentences were not just superficial flirtations, they were deeper, more meaningful conversations. For the first time in years, John felt truly understood. As the conversation progressed, he began to open up his repressed feelings to Melanie. Melanie was pouring her heart out to him in the same way. As the bond between them grew stronger, these casual conversations became the most exciting thing in John's life. But there was something he didn't yet realize. This relationship was leading him to a disaster he could never have predicted. John and Melanie's conversations became more and more intense. At first, they only talked about everyday topics, but soon they turned to emotional and intimate exchanges. John realized that the hours he spent with Melanie were the only thing that connected him to life. When he wasn't talking to her, an indescribable longing filled him. He now waited for Melanie every night, looking forward to her messages. As their conversations deepened, the attraction between them became physical. They began exchanging daring messages and photographs without showing their faces, keeping their identities hidden. John was lost in this dangerous game, and it was too late to go back. Melanie felt no different. She too said that she had been lonely for years and that these conversations made her feel alive again. She sincerely listened to John's every sentence, making him feel more special than ever. The two surrendered to their passion without questioning who they were, leaving everything aside. But there was something they didn't know. This forbidden world they had built was dragging them into an abyss they could not escape. For John, Melanie was no longer just a fling, but the person he had connected with most in his life. He wanted to get to know her better, not just through writings and photographs. After thinking about it for days, he asked Melanie to turn on her cameras. Hesitant at first, Melanie finally agreed to the idea. That night, they talked for hours, hearing each other's voices for the first time. This moment, filled with laughter, deep conversations, and shared secrets, brought John's excitement to its peak. Finally, Melanie said, "I want to show you my face, but first, I want you to close your eyes." John agreed to this game and closed his eyes. Melanie took a deep breath and turned on her camera. For a few seconds, silence reigned. Then John opened his eyes. At that moment, time stopped. When he saw the face on the screen, he gasped. His mind went blank. He couldn't even hear his heart beating. The woman before him was his own mother. Melanie's face suddenly turned ashen. They both froze, unable to say a word. The truth hit them like a bolt of lightning. The person they had adored, the person with whom they had shared their most intimate moments, was the most forbidden of blood relatives. As John turned off the computer with trembling hands, the darkness of the night fell over him. As soon as the screen went black, John froze in his chair. His body trembled, his mind tried to deny this terrible reality. It had to be a mistake, but a nauseating feeling inside told him it wasn't a mistake. He sat with his eyes staring into space. Hours passed, but he couldn't move. Melanie, on the other side of the screen, gasped in horror. She wanted to take a deep breath, but it felt like a stone had settled in her chest. Every message, every word, every emotion she shared with her son was like a dagger in her mind. Finally, with shaking hands, he picked up the phone and typed a message to John. "I'm sorry, son. I've been alone since your father died, and this is how I've tried to fill the void. I never thought something like this would happen. What do we do now?" When John saw the message, he threw the phone almost reflexively. He threw himself against the wall in deep hatred, his heart pounding with anger and disgust. He had to forget this. He had to pretend it had never happened. But how? The woman he had considered his mother all these years had also become his biggest secret. She began to walk around her room, looking for a way out, but the vortex was pulling her in. A voice rose from the depths of his mind. "You can never erase this sin." John tried everything to forget what happened. He changed his phone number, deleted his social media accounts, and stopped using anonymous chat apps altogether. But nothing could quiet his mind. He couldn't fall asleep at night, and when he closed his eyes, his mother's face would flash before his eyes. At work, he couldn't focus and felt alienated from his family. His wife started asking him questions. "You've been so strange lately, has something happened?" But John had no answer. The shame and the sickening truth was slowly consuming him. Melanie, on the other hand, was plunged into the same darkness. When she realized that her son's number had changed, she panicked. She wanted to reach him, but how? The shame made her not dare to speak. For days, she didn't look in the mirror, didn't leave her room. She forgot to eat, to talk to people. His whole life had become the price of one wrong decision. But the worst thing was the longing that grew inside her. No matter how much she tried to deny it, she wanted to feel John's presence. But there was another feeling growing inside John: anger. The anger inside John grew day by day. No matter what he did, he couldn't forget what had happened. Alcohol, work, his family. Nothing could erase the darkness in his mind. Every night, Melanie's voice echoed in his ears. What are we going to do? The question was driving him mad. That night, he decided to vomit up the poison inside him. After drinking for hours, he stood up and got behind the wheel. He knew where he was going. Unconsciously, he pulled up in front of his mother's house, his heart pounding with rage. He took a deep breath, then knocked on the door. When the door opened, there stood a broken woman with red eyes. Melanie was exhausted from crying, but there was only hate in John's eyes. "What are we going to do, huh? Tell me! Do you know what you've put me through?" John shouted. Melanie took a step backwards, her voice shaking. "I didn't know either. I swear to God, if I had known, I would never," she said in a whisper. But John wasn't listening. He shook his head from side to side, then headed for the kitchen. Melanie's eyes widened. "John, what are you doing?" she asked. But he didn't answer. He took a knife from the drawer. His fingers were trembling, but the anger inside was stronger. "I can't forgive this! I can't carry this!" he screamed. Melanie backed away, but it was too late. John's hand shot up and he stabbed Melanie repeatedly in the chest. Melanie screamed, but it was no use. John dropped the knife, his hands shaking. Melanie's bloodied body lay in front of his eyes. He felt something rupture inside him. Anger, hatred, shame, all of it suddenly made no sense. The walls seemed to close in on him. She could hardly breathe. Then he heard sirens. Someone had called the police. He didn't even think of running. What was he going to run for? She had made the biggest mistake of her life, and there was no turning back now. When the door burst open, he watched the police with glazed eyes. He raised his hands, offering no resistance. As the handcuffs closed around his wrists, his mind was blank. In court, everyone waited for an explanation from him. The newspapers were full of headlines. The man who brutally murdered his mother. But no one knew the real truth. John didn't say a word. No defense, no remorse. Even when the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, there was not a single expression on his face. Years passed, but John remained the same. He didn't talk to anyone in prison. He didn't connect with anyone. At night, sitting alone in his cell, Melanie's last words echoed in his ears. What are we going to do? But there was no one left to answer that question.